Amina had always dreamed of a life beyond the narrow, dusty roads of her small village. From a young age, she watched her parents, Jabir and Sadia, struggle against the currents of poverty, their lives filled with endless work but little reward. Her father, once a proud merchant with a thriving business, had seen his fortunes unravel in the blink of an eye. The market crashed, and with it, Jabir's dreams of a prosperous future for his family. Though Sadia worked tirelessly, sewing clothes for neighbours and doing what she could, the weight of their financial burdens became too heavy to carry. Amina grew up watching them work, always with a smile on their faces, hiding the exhaustion in their eyes. She admired their resilience, but deep down, she knew that life would not always be kind. As a child, she often dreamed of a world where she could change things, not just for herself, but for her parents too. She could almost picture herself in a grand house, surrounded by books, music, and laughter, where there was always enough food to eat and no fear of tomorrow. But those dreams, like the ones her parents once had, seemed to drift farther away with each passing day. When the financial situation grew more dire, Amina made the hardest decision of her life. She would leave her village and seek work in the distant city of Alderwood. It was a place she had only heard of in whispers, rumours of noble estates, vast gardens, and glittering opportunities. But Amina knew that it was her only chance to escape the confines of poverty and make something of herself. The journey to Alderwood was long and exhausting. The city was a far cry from the idyllic vision she had imagined. As she arrived, overwhelmed by the crowds and the constant hustle of the city, her heart sank. The bright lights and polished buildings hid the grim reality of what awaited her, a life as a servant in a noble household. She was taken to Alderwood Estate, a sprawling mansion perched atop a hill, surrounded by thick forests. The grandeur of the place was intimidating. Massive stone walls, expansive gardens, and the faint scent of wealth filled the air. The house was a world of its own, a bubble where everything was pristine and perfect, yet dark shadows lingered behind the walls. Amina was introduced to Lady Evaline, the matriarch of the household, whose cold, calculating eyes scanned her from head to toe. There was no warmth in Lady Evaline's gaze, only the sharp, clinical assessment of someone who had spent her life in the pursuit of control. To her, Amina was nothing more than another tool to fulfill her needs. Lady Evaline gave no words of encouragement, no promises of comfort. Instead, she gave orders, telling Amina to begin her duties immediately. The other servants, like Rashad, a kind-hearted but mysterious man with a quiet presence, offered their warnings in hushed tones. "This place, it's not what you think," he said, his eyes darkening as he spoke. "Be careful who you trust." His words echoed in Amina's mind, though she had no choice but to carry on. The days turned into weeks, and the reality of her situation became clearer. The long hours of cleaning, cooking, and serving drained her spirit. Lady Evaline was relentless, never showing an ounce of compassion. Every small mistake was met with harsh words or cold, silent disapproval. But what stung the most was the emotional weight of it all, the loneliness that crept into her heart as she spent each day surrounded by people, but feeling more isolated than ever. Despite the cruelty, Amina found small moments of solace. Jamila, a fellow servant, would share a quiet laugh during their brief moments of rest, and Kadir, a young man who worked in the stables, would offer her a kind word or two. Their friendship, though small, became her anchor in the sea of harsh treatment. They spoke of better days, of dreams that still lingered in their hearts despite the cruel reality. But as time wore on, Amina's dreams of a better life began to feel like distant memories. The constant exhaustion, the long hours, the never-ending demands, it was all too much. Yet she refused to give up. Deep within her, the spark of ambition still flickered. She knew she had to endure, for her family, for herself. A better life was still out there, somewhere. She could almost taste it. And so, with each passing day, Amina continued to serve, her heart heavy with the weight of the dreams she carried, while the mansion around her seemed to grow colder and more suffocating. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky painted itself in shades of orange and pink, Amina found herself tending to the sprawling garden at Alderwood Estate. The scent of roses mixed with the earthy smell of damp soil, filling the air as she pulled weeds from the flower beds. The solitude of the garden was a welcome reprieve from the constant bustle of the mansion. Here, surrounded by nature's quiet beauty, she could almost forget her troubles. As she bent to trim a vine, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You work hard," the voice said, gentle but commanding attention. Startled, Amina stood up quickly, wiping the dirt from her hands onto her apron. Before her stood a man, tall and dressed in a simple cloak that didn't quite match the grandeur of the estate. His features were striking, dark eyes that seemed to hold mysteries, and a smile that, though faint, held kindness. There was something about him that made Amina's heart skip a beat, though she couldn't place why. "I do what I must," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. She had learned not to show weakness, even in the face of kindness. But there was something disarming about this man, something that made her feel seen. "I've noticed you," he said, his gaze studying her. "Your dedication is rare here." Amina hesitated, but then found herself opening up, as if the words were escaping before she could stop them. "I never asked for this life. I dreamt of something more, something different. But it feels as though every time I get close, the world pushes me back down." The man listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. "I know how that feels," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. To want more, but be forced to settle for less. Amina's heart fluttered. She felt an unexpected connection to this stranger, someone who seemed to understand the deepest parts of her heart without her having to explain. But as quickly as the moment came, it passed. The sound of footsteps approaching from the mansion interrupted their conversation, and the man gave her a polite nod before turning and disappearing into the shadows of the garden. Amina watched him go, feeling a strange emptiness settle in her chest. Who was he? And why did she feel as though they shared something, even if for only a brief moment? The days that followed were marked by subtle changes around the Alderwood estate. Rumours of political unrest had reached the manor, whispers of battles brewing in the distant corners of the kingdom. The noble family's wealth, once abundant, began to dwindle as markets faltered and alliances shifted. Lady Evaline, ever the ruler of her household, began to show cracks in her usual iron grip. She became more restless, her temper shorter. The tension in the air was palpable, and even the servants could feel it. Amina, however, remained focused on her duties. She watched Lady Evaline grow more distant, a silent war playing out behind her icy composure. Despite the instability of the kingdom, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that the estate, her entire life, was about to change. In the midst of this uncertainty, an unexpected visitor appeared at the estate one morning. Prince Zade. He arrived with little fanfare, slipping into the estate as if he were just another nobleman visiting the property. To the servants, his presence was a mere curiosity, a fleeting interruption in the otherwise monotonous days. But for Amina, it was something entirely different. The same man she had met in the garden weeks ago was standing before her once more. But this time, there was a quiet intensity to his demeanour. The kindness in his eyes hadn't changed, but there was something more now, an unspoken connection that lingered between them. Prince Zade would occasionally pass through the estate, never making his presence known to the noble family. He spoke little to the others, but every time he crossed paths with Amina, he found ways to offer small tokens, an elegant flower from the royal garden, a handwritten note tucked discreetly into her apron pocket. Amina was both intrigued and cautious. She had learned to be wary of the intentions of those in power, especially after years of harsh treatment under Lady Evaline's watchful eye. Yet despite her reservations, she couldn't help but wonder about his gestures. Were they just the kindness of a prince, or was there something more to his interest in her? She carefully tucked the latest letter he had left her into the folds of her dress, her mind swirling with questions. Who was this man really? What did he want with her? And more importantly, what did she want from him? As the weeks passed, the connection between Amina and Prince Zade grew stronger, though it remained a secret. Their stolen moments together in the garden, away from prying eyes, became their only solace. In these brief encounters, they spoke of their dreams, their hopes for a better future. Amina learned that Zade, too, was bound by duty, his life as a prince filled with expectations he did not wish to fulfill. He longed for freedom, for a life where he could make his own choices without the weight of his title pressing down on him. Amina found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't experienced before. The walls she had carefully built around her heart began to crack, piece by piece, as she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more. But with every passing day, the reality of their situation became clearer. She was a servant, and he was royalty. Their worlds were as different as night and day, and though the bond between them felt genuine, they could never be together. Amina knew this. Society would never accept such a relationship. The consequences would be dire, both for her and for Zade. Still, despite the barriers that separated them, they continued to meet in secret. Each encounter was a breath of fresh air, a fleeting moment of happiness in a life that had been nothing but hardship. But as the weeks turned into months, Amina began to wonder how long they could keep their forbidden friendship hidden. She couldn't help but feel that, sooner or later, the truth would come to light. Her heart ached with the thought, but she knew she couldn't give up on the connection they had found. No matter how impossible their situation seemed, Amina was willing to hold on to the hope that one day things might change, that somehow, against all odds, they might find a way to be together. As the days passed, the bond between Amina and Prince Zade only deepened. Their secret meetings, hidden away from the prying eyes of the mansion, were moments of pure escape for both of them. Despite the immense pressure they were under, the joy of their stolen time together kept their spirits alight. But the shadows of the house began to grow longer, and Lady Evaline's watchful eyes never seemed to blink. From the moment Amina began to attract the attention of Prince Zade, Lady Evaline had grown increasingly suspicious. She was not a fool. She had spent years building her power and influence, and the idea of a servant and a prince becoming close was simply unacceptable. At first, she brushed aside the possibility of anything untoward happening, but as the small gifts from Zade continued, and as Amina's demeanour began to change, Evaline could feel the winds of rebellion stirring within her household. She had watched her power slip away bit by bit as the political unrest in the kingdom continued to shake the foundations of her wealth and position. Now, there was a new threat, Amina. A mere servant who had no right to draw the prince's attention, yet somehow she had managed to do so. That could not and would not stand. Lady Evaline began to devise a plan. She needed to make an example of Amina, to remind everyone of their place. She couldn't afford to let this affection between her servant and the prince fester any longer. With calculated precision, Lady Evaline set her scheme into motion. She planted false evidence in Amina's quarters, an item that belonged to Lady Evaline, a piece of valuable jewellery, one that had gone missing weeks ago. A clever trick to frame Amina for theft. If the household discovered this, it would be the perfect opportunity for Evaline to accuse Amina of treachery, betrayal. She knew that the prince's affection for the girl could be twisted into a tale of manipulation, of a servant trying to climb above her station. The timing, too, was perfect. The instability of the kingdom had already caused cracks in their wealth, and this could serve as a diversion to refocus the household's anger onto Amina. The pressure built in Amina's chest as she went about her duties. She noticed the shift in the air, the cold stares from the other servants, the whispers behind her back. It didn't take long for the accusations to start, and before she knew it, Lady Evaline stood before her in the grand hall, flanked by several of the estate's staff. "You've been caught, Amina," Lady Evaline said coldly, her voice dripping with venom. "Stealing from the family and using your charms to manipulate the prince. I should have known from the beginning. You think you can rise above your station, but you will not. You will not escape this." Amina's heart stopped. The jewellery. She had never touched it. It was all a lie, a cruel ploy designed to ruin her. Her hands trembled, but she kept her head high. "I didn't steal it, Lady Evaline. I swear to you I didn't." But Lady Evaline was relentless. "Your word means nothing now. The evidence is clear. You will be removed from this estate immediately, and you will be punished." Just as Amina's world began to crumble, a voice cut through the tension, loud and firm. "Enough!" Amina's head snapped toward the source of the voice, and her heart surged as she saw Prince Zade step forward, his face a mask of resolve. He stood tall, his presence commanding the room as all eyes turned toward him. "I will not allow this to happen," Prince Zade declared, his voice unwavering. "Amina has done no wrong. She has been loyal to this household, and to accuse her like this is unjust. I will not stand by and let her be punished for something she didn't do." The room fell into stunned silence. The servants, the nobles, even Lady Evaline, all of them were taken aback by the prince's words. It was one thing to defend a servant in private, but here, in the heart of the estate, in front of the entire household, Zade's words carried a weight none of them could ignore. Prince Zade turned to face Lady Evaline, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "This plot ends now. Amina has not stolen from you, and neither will you destroy her life with lies." Lady Evaline's face twisted in fury, her control slipping. But Zade was not finished. "I have something to say," he continued, his gaze now focused solely on Amina. The room seemed to hold its breath, every person waiting for his next words. "I love you, Amina," Zade said, his voice strong and clear for all to hear. "I have loved you from the moment we met. You are the one I want, and I will not let anyone stand in the way of our future." Amina's heart raced as the words sank in. This was it. His confession, in front of everyone. It was bold, reckless, and utterly unexpected. But in that moment, Amina felt as though the ground beneath her shifted. The walls that had surrounded her life, the chains that had bound her to a life of servitude seemed to crack open. In one single act of courage, Zade had defied everything she had believed in. He had chosen her. Lady Evaline's eyes widened in shock, her carefully crafted world beginning to unravel. The nobles and servants around her whispered in hushed tones, unsure of what to make of the situation. The prince had just declared his love for a servant, something that had never happened in their world. Amina stood frozen, her mind a swirl of emotions. This wasn't just an act of love. It was a declaration of war, against the very system that had kept her bound, against everything that had kept her from dreaming of a future. But as the weight of Zade's words settled over her, a new sense of clarity washed over her. This could be the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when everything changed. But there was a choice to make. Should she leave behind everything she knew, her humble roots, the world of servants and simplicity, to step into a future of uncertainty, luxury, and power by Zade's side? Or should she remain true to the life she had fought so hard to carve for herself, the life she understood? Amina felt torn, pulled between two worlds that seemed so far apart. There was no clear answer, but the question had been asked, and she knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. The choice to step into a new life was not an easy one for Amina, but she knew that her love for Zade was undeniable. With his unwavering support and her own determination, she made the decision to leave behind the life she had always known. The life of a servant, bound by invisible chains, was no longer hers to bear. Together, they would face the unknown. Amina's introduction to the royal court was nothing short of overwhelming. The opulence of the palace, the piercing gazes of nobles, and the whispers that followed her every step reminded her of the vast chasm between her past and present. Yet, Amina held her head high, carrying herself with the grace of someone who had weathered far greater storms. Prince Zade stood by her side at every moment, his presence a constant reassurance that she was not alone. Lady Evaline, who had once ruled Alderwood estate with an iron fist, found her power slipping through her fingers. The prince's bold actions had left her reputation in tatters, and even her allies began to distance themselves. She retreated to the shadows, no longer the commanding figure she had once been. Watching Amina step into a role she could never claim for herself filled Evaline with a bitter fury, but she knew better than to challenge the prince any further. As Amina began her transformation, she found herself navigating not only the intricacies of court life, but also the turmoil that plagued the kingdom. Political unrest simmered in every corner, with factions vying for control and citizens growing restless under the weight of economic struggles. Zade was thrust into the center of these conflicts, forced to make decisions that would determine the fate of the realm. Amina, drawing on her own hardships and the empathy they had instilled in her, became his confidant and advisor. Her perspective, untainted by the privileges of royalty, brought clarity to even the most complicated dilemmas. Their bond grew stronger with each challenge they faced together. Zade found solace in Amina's unwavering belief in him, while she drew strength from his faith in her ability to rise to the occasion. Though the path before them was fraught with difficulties, their love became a beacon of hope for those around them. The day of Amina's coronation was unlike anything the kingdom had ever seen. The streets were filled with citizens from all walks of life, eager to witness the momentous occasion. The maid, who had once been dismissed and overlooked, now stood at the heart of the kingdom, dressed in regal attire that seemed to glow in the light of the sun. As she walked toward the throne, the whispers of the crowd grew louder, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and admiration. When Zade placed the crown upon her head, a wave of emotion washed over Amina. This was more than a title, more than a role. It was a triumph over the barriers that had sought to keep her in her place. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the palace walls. Amina met Zade's gaze, and in that moment, they knew that their love had conquered the impossible. As queen, Amina embraced her role with a sense of purpose. She was determined to use her position to bring about meaningful change, to ensure that no one else would endure the hardships she had faced. She worked tirelessly alongside Zade to implement reforms that uplifted the common folk, addressing their grievances and giving them a voice in the kingdom's affairs. Her initiatives were met with resistance from some members of the nobility, but Amina's resolve never wavered. Her kindness, intelligence, and strength of character eventually won over even her harshest critics. Amina's compassion extended beyond the walls of the palace. She visited villages, listened to the stories of her people, and ensured that their concerns were heard. The citizens, who had once doubted her ability to rule, came to see her as a queen who truly understood their struggles. Under her leadership, the kingdom began to heal, its fractured communities slowly coming together in unity. Zade, too, found himself transformed by Amina's influence. Her unwavering commitment to justice and equality inspired him to be a better leader, one who ruled not with an iron hand but with an open heart. Together, they became a symbol of hope, their love story serving as a reminder that barriers could be broken and dreams could be realized. The years that followed were not without challenges, but Amina and Zade faced them with the same determination that had brought them together. Their love remained a constant source of strength, a reminder of all they had overcome. Amina's journey from a humble maid to a revered queen became a tale told throughout the kingdom, inspiring countless others to believe in the power of perseverance and love. In the end, Amina's triumph was not just her own. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been told they were not enough, for those who had dared to dream beyond their circumstances. Her legacy was one of resilience, compassion, and a belief in the boundless potential of the human spirit. And as she stood beside Zade, gazing out at the kingdom they had built together, Amina knew that their story was far from over. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities. As Amina walked through the gardens of the royal palace, the cool breeze carried with it the scent of blooming flowers and the soft hum of life around her. The very air seemed to hold whispers of her past, a past that now felt like a distant dream. She paused by the fountain, its gentle splashes reminding her of the small well in her village, where she once drew water each morning. It was moments like these that brought her journey into sharp focus, the struggles she had endured, the heartache that had tested her resolve, and the love that had transformed her life. She often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. There were days she could hardly believe it herself. Amina, the once timid servant of Alderwood estate, had become a queen. Yet, for all her triumphs, she vowed never to forget her humble beginnings. It was those early experiences, the hunger, the pain, the hope, that shaped her. They had taught her empathy, resilience, and the value of kindness. She carried those lessons with her into every decision she made as queen, determined to use her position to create a better world for her people. Under Amina's rule, the kingdom blossomed in ways few could have imagined. Her reforms focused on uplifting the common folk, giving them opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. Schools were built in the most impoverished areas, ensuring that every child had access to education. Trade routes were expanded, providing work and prosperity to struggling communities. Laws were rewritten to protect the vulnerable, and for the first time in the kingdom's history, every voice, no matter how small, was heard. The people adored her. Amina's compassion and wisdom earned her the title, the People's Queen. She frequently visited towns and villages, sitting with farmers, craftsmen, and labourers to listen to their concerns. Her presence alone was enough to inspire hope. She understood their struggles because she had lived them, and they trusted her because she never forgot what it meant to be one of them. Amina's relationship with Zade continued to be the cornerstone of her life. Together, they were a formidable team, balancing the demands of leadership with the deep bond they shared. Zade's unwavering support allowed Amina to flourish, while her insights and courage helped him grow as a ruler. Their love, born in the shadows of secrecy, now shone as a beacon for the entire kingdom. Their story became legendary. Minstrels sang songs of the maid who captured the heart of a prince and became a queen. Poets penned verses about their love, and storytellers wove their tale into fables that inspired generations. It wasn't just a story of romance, it was a story of defiance, of breaking boundaries, and of proving that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. As the years passed, Amina and Zade welcomed children into their lives. Each child carried the legacy of their parents, raised with the values of compassion, justice, and humility. Amina instilled in them the importance of service and the belief that true strength lay in kindness. The royal family became a symbol of unity and hope, embodying the ideals Amina had always held dear. The kingdom thrived under their reign. Where there had once been division, there was now unity. Where there had been despair, there was hope. The reforms Amina championed became the foundation for a brighter future, ensuring that no one would have to endure the hardships she once faced. Her efforts bridged the gap between the nobility and the commoners, creating a society where everyone had a chance to rise. Years turned into decades, and Amina's story was passed down through generations. Children sat at their grandparents' feet, listening to tales of the queen who had once been a servant. Her journey became a symbol of possibility, reminding people that no dream was too big and no obstacle too great. The name Amina became synonymous with hope, transformation, and the belief that love could conquer all. As Amina stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out at the bustling streets of the kingdom she had helped transform, a sense of peace washed over her. The laughter of her children echoed in the halls behind her, a reminder of the life she had built. Zade joined her, his hand finding hers as they gazed out together. In that moment, Amina knew that their legacy would endure, not just in the laws they had changed or the prosperity they had brought, but in the hearts of the people they had inspired. Her journey had been one of trials and triumphs, of heartbreak and love. It had tested her in ways she could never have imagined, but it had also shown her the strength that lay within. Amina's life was proof that even the smallest flame could light up the darkest of nights, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories began in the most humble of places.